Action Reserve. Thank you all for joining us today. We're gonna wait a couple minutes to let a few more folks trickle in, but we'll get started momentarily, so just hang tight. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, all right, why don't we get started? I have a lot of material to cover with you all today. So, and this is Trevor Anderson, a policy manager with the Climate Action Reserve. I just want to thank you all for attending our session today. The Climate Action Reserve is developing an adipic acid production project protocol. We have received funding from Climeco to do so. Climeco is one of our key stakeholders in this project type and is one of our project developers. They have drafted the preliminary materials to help give us a head start. However, while Climeco will maintain a stakeholder in the process, all decisions and work from this point forward are solely in the hands of the Climate Action Reserve. And so with that, we'll dive in now to give you all here an overview of what an adipic acid protocol as developed by the Reserve might entail. Some few housekeeping items. All the attendees will be muted as in listen only mode. We'll plan to take questions at the end of the session today. My colleague Heather Raven will be there to respond to your questions and keep them organized for me. And if we do not get to yours or do not answer any questions that popped up during the meeting, we will follow up via email, and the slides and a recording of the presentation will be posted online afterwards as well. So the purpose of today's meeting is to provide an overview of the Reserve and our protocol development process. We're excited to be kicking off the development of a brand new protocol, so we just want to make sure that all our attendees today and interested stakeholders are aware of our organization and how we develop protocols. We're going to then share our specific research findings and protocol development plans for the adipic acid production project type, and hope to get some, discuss the key issues or protocol elements and to try to get some initial feedback. And additionally, we will be hoping to recruit additional stakeholders to partake in our adipic acid work group for the development of this protocol. So quickly for the agenda, again, an overview of our organization, the Reserve, followed by providing an in-depth look at our protocol development process before then turning the focus onto adipic acid specifically, looking at US production and GHG emission trends. looking at what's been done internationally with this project type as it pertains to carbon offsets, going over our proposed protocol approach, and then wrapping up with our timeline, next steps, and leaving time for questions. So again, my name is Trevor Anderson, a policy manager with the Reserve. For those of you who do not know me, I've been with the Reserve for close to 3 years now. I have updated the nitrogen management protocol for the Reserve, as well as developed a solar PV methodology for our new Climate Forward program. So I have experience, with developing our protocols or methodologies, and I will be the lead developing the adipic acid protocol for the Reserve. Mentioned I'm joined today by my colleague Heather Raven, our senior project coordinator, who will be fielding all your questions asked today. And additional staff will be, of course, supporting the protocol development process, but these are the two colleagues on the call today. All right, so the Climate Action Reserve, for those of you who may not be aware or are unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit based here in Los Angeles, California, with the mission to develop, promote, and support innovative, credible, market-based climate change solutions that benefit economies, ecosystems, and society. We establish high-quality standards for our carbon offset projects through a stakeholder-driven and standardized process for projects that can be implemented across North America. We are an accredited offset project registry under the California Cap and Trade program. See a little bit more about what that entails exactly in coming slides. And our expertise and insight actually helped inform the development of the state of California's Cap and Trade program. When it comes to offsets, we serve both the California compliance and voluntary carbon markets. And we uphold a strong reputation for integrity and experience providing best-in-class registry services for the offset markets. Beyond carbon offsets, even though that's what the focus will be today, we also provide GHG policy consulting and technical work. We have a recently launched new program called Climate Forward that looks at forecasted greenhouse gas emission reductions and climate impact score, which is a climate finance rating system. So I just want to be clear about our role here, though. As I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization, and we, of course, interact a lot with the different players involved in the carbon markets, but we remain independent from them all. We are independent from the state of California. We do not fund or develop projects. We do not take any ownership of the offset credits that stem from the projects. We're not a market exchange, and we remain independent from the third-party verifiers as well, which is consistent with international standards. However, all our third-party verification bodies, of course, receive ANC accreditation, and then will receive general and protocol-specific training by the Reserve or the California Air Resources Board, ARB, if it is for the California compliance market. So what are carbon offsets, for those of you who may not be familiar, before we go any further here, right? So they are verified emission reductions in unregulated sectors and have barriers to adoption. As you'll find out a little bit later, adipic acid is a great candidate that falls under that hat. On the left, you can see just some this figure on the left that is just some examples of sources that release greenhouse gas emissions, and then on the right just kind of gives you a sense of some of our project types that reduce or avoid or sequester even greenhouse gas emissions, like the forests, or we have the livestock protocol that captures, destroys methane from cows, cow manure. And so how offsets work, a seller, so a project developer potentially would need an incentive to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and then an external buyer wants to or needs to offset their own emissions, but can't do it all 100% on site, so they can purchase carbon offset credits. One offset across all project types is equal to 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalents, and for the Reserve, our voluntary carbon offset credits are termed climate reserve tons, or CRTs. This chart here at the bottom gives you a sense of how where you go from A to Z to actually get carbon offset credits. Today, we obviously will be focusing on the first step here, protocol development. And then once a protocol is in place, and that is a big, huge first step, project development can get underway, where then projects will be listed publicly in the reserves registry, also the reserve. Projects then undergo third-party verification, and then we review that third-party verification before we actually register or issue carbon credits. This is a loaded slide, so I'll try to summarize. As mentioned, we serve multiple markets. The two chief carbon markets here: the voluntary market, where any individual, business, nonprofit, or otherwise organization who has goals to voluntarily reduce their emissions and is looking to purchase carbon offset credits to do so. The reserve currently has 18 project types under this voluntary market, but we have 2 in development. One being this Adipic acid protocol. The prices really fluctuate depending on project type and the buyer's goals. As you can see there, I mean, 50 cents to $50 in range there's quite a lot of variability there. These data come to us from Ecosystem Marketplace. Seen at the bottom here too, some of the typical players or buyers in this might be the airlines like Delta, the Microsofts, Apples, Googles of the world, and most recently Lyft, and then as we turn to the compliance market, and the buyers are these capped entities, the big emitters and utilities who are required to reduce their emissions by law. And chiefly in the state of California, and they have to use California Air Resource Board approved protocols to do so. There are 6 project types to date, and several of which have been adopted or adapted based on reserve voluntary protocols. You can see the credit prices have more consistency there, as there is, a greater demand for these credits, these projects, as these capped entities will purchase them. And so you can see at the bottom there just some examples of who those might be. These oil companies, refineries like BP. And so that just is our overview of the different markets there. I had failed to mention, of course, Quebec is linked up with California, so they are a part of that as well. All right, as I mentioned, the reserve is an offset project registry, an improved one by the state of California. So what does this exactly entail? So we, as seen in the figure here, we uphold high quality for all our standard processes and methods, do a very rigorous review of the science that's out there, or transparent throughout the process. Case in point, this meeting today, and also facilitate public and stakeholder participation, all which brings credibility and to the marketplace and instills market confidence. And so if I hadn't already mentioned, this would add with, as it focuses to our protocols in particular, that's establishing clear rules for the definitions of the project types, the eligibility factors, the quantification of the emission reductions, the monitoring of the project's performance, any QA, quality assurance, quality controls that might need to in place to ensure continued performance, and then the reporting and verification of the project and its emission reductions to us. And so then we also do provide that administrative layer as well, where we track all our projects and the credits that are registered. So carbon offsets, and what helps us ensure that, carbon offsets projects registered with the reserve maintain such a high level of quality. We ensure that they are real, additional, permanent, verifiable, and do not result in any double counting. Real sounds pretty straightforward, intuitive, but we make sure that procedures are in place so that the accounting is conservative, comprehensive, and scientifically credible, so that when these projects are implemented, the emission reductions really are happening. This gets at if the emission reductions are in addition to what would have happened under business as usual considerations, situations. So that means that they wouldn't have occurred if it wasn't for the incentives provided by the carbon market. Permanent mostly deals with sequestration project types where following the criteria here, put procedures in place to ensure that the carbon sequestered stays sequestered for at least a period of 100 years. Mentioned verifiable, that all projects undergo an independent third-party verification after the fact. And of course, ensuring that there isn't double counting, that all our projects must demonstrate clear ownership and that they can be the only ones owning it and others cannot be laying claim to the emission reductions stemming from our projects. Briefly, just we'll roll over our accounting principles as well that we incorporate into our protocols to ensure they are of the highest quality. Those are relevance, completeness, and consistency here, so that they are designed around standardized practical approaches, that all relevant information is included in the protocol, and that we uphold consistency so that the protocols are standardized to apply consistent accounting and monitoring methods across projects of the same type, and then similarly that a same level of rigor and conservativeness is applied to across all our various project types. The other remaining three are transparency, accuracy, and conservativeness. So transparency, I mean, we provide sufficient information with the public, letting them know about our protocols, our organization. Accuracy in our protocols, where we include uncertainties and reduce bias as much as possible. And we uphold the principle of conservativeness as well, that all assumptions, values, and procedures are conservative to ensure that greenhouse gas emission reductions are not overestimated and really gets at that real criteria. To give you a quick overview of our project protocols, we have, as I mentioned earlier, 18 voluntary ones currently in place, 2 in development. The adipic acid one here, of course, which falls under the hat of industrial gases. The other one that's in development and it's currently out for public comment, is a grassland protocol adapted for use in Canada. So we will have protocols truly in all 3 countries in North America. The protocols highlighted in bold here are the ones that have also been adapted for use in the California compliance market. This map here shows you where all our projects have been implemented to date with the Climate Action Reserve, whether they've been listed, that is, they are being implemented, but and so they're on our registry, but they haven't been verified yet, and or if they have been verified and credits are registered. And so you can see, like that the L, for example, is our livestock projects, F for our forest projects, and what have you, scattered across the states here and into Mexico as well. To give you some updates on our stats, as of yesterday, we have 278 account holders in our registry system. So that could be anyone who's developing. That would include like the project developers and possibly the different owners of the carbon credits. We have 369 projects listed and actively reporting as we speak. It says resulted in over 136 million credits being issued to date. So that's over 136 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents reduced or avoided, sequestered. And then over 39 million of those credits have been retired, that is purchased by buyers and for use in offsetting their own emissions. To give you an example of what these projects look like, because adipic acid falls under the industry hat, I thought I'd give you an example with another industrial protocol, that being the ozone depleting substances one, or ODS. This involves the collection and destruction of used refrigerants that are chlorofluorocarbons and hydrochlorofluorocarbons, which are chemicals that have been phased out by the Montreal Protocol, but are still being recycled and have extremely high global warming potentials. So their capture and destruction results in significant amount of emission reductions. They're transported to approved facilities and permanently destroyed. And the credits are based on the average leak rates of those stockpiles of refrigerants where the greenhouse gases are emitting to the atmosphere, minus the expected leaks of their their substitute gases. To date, we have 113 ODS projects listed and registered with the reserve, and have nearly issued 18 million credits stemming just from these project types. Now, to provide an overview of our protocol development, we issue broad public input, or solicit broad public input, and which we're kind of doing today right now, and always then convene sector-specific stakeholder work groups. Our goal is to create a uniform standard that is widely recognized and builds upon best practice. We may incorporate the best elements of other existing protocols and do some type of protocol adaptations, but we do not adopt methodologies from other sources, for example, the Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, the Gold Standard, or the Verified Carbon Standard. And they are designed as protocols provide the step-by-step instructions on project implementation. Really, probably could have made that clear a little bit earlier on, but so the protocols are key to providing, again, the requirements and guidance for how to go about implementing a carbon offset project with the reserve. Our goals with developing protocols, the reserve really prioritizes standardization, and so we like to develop a standardized approach for quantifying, monitoring, and verifying greenhouse gas emission reductions. This entails substantial research into industry trends and on adoption of greenhouse gas reducing practices, setting criteria and reference points based on these trends, providing specific tools for quantifying emissions and possibly for the eligibility assessments as well as providing detailed and specific instructions and requirements for project monitoring. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we train the independent verifiers on our protocol-specific standards and the specific set of protocols. We maintain consistency with or improve upon existing methodologies. If those who are familiar with our organizations, you know that we might release a version 1.0, but from lessons learned with project implementation, we'll go and update the methodologies going forward. And so we really do have this delicate balancing act of incorporating accuracy, conservativeness, and practicality. We want to be flexible as much as possible with our protocols, but need to ensure all that the offset quality and principles are incorporated to the fullest. And as I mentioned, the reserve really does prioritize standardization. It's kind of a key distinction of us over other offset registries. And so there's two main elements to this. That's determining the eligibility and additionality of the projects using standard criteria rather than having project-specific assessments. And then also quantifying greenhouse gas emission reductions using standard baseline assumptions, emission factors, and monitoring. The benefits to this are there's a lot of benefits, I guess, at the end result to the project developers and verifiers. That it reduces the upfront costs with project development and facilitates the efficiency of the review and approval of projects. It improves the transparency and consistency of it all, as the same standards apply to all projects of the same type. And then the prescriptive guidance really does eliminate any gray areas for judgment. But I caution here, what this does mean is that the reserve then spends an additional amount of upfront time to develop these standardized procedures in each of our protocols. So give you a quick overview of what a typical protocol development timeline might look like. In general, our protocol developments take roughly anywhere between 6 to 18 months to develop, and possibly sometimes even longer than that. But the key steps are highlighted here: that we do our internal research and scoping. We might produce and release an issue paper on the topic, have a scoping meeting, which we're actually doing today here, form a work group, more on that in the coming slides. We produce a draft. We hold this work group process, and a 30-day public comment period to improve our draft before then presenting that protocol draft to our board for adoption, at which point it becomes effective and projects can be implemented. I also have mentioned your consideration by California Resources Board, because that is just, a kind of more under the radar goal that of course we'd like to see our protocols adapted for use in the compliance market as well, when they can be. That is, if they're not in a capped sector. So more on the work group formation, because as I mentioned, a key objective of today's meeting is to raise awareness that we're forming a work group here to participate and provide feedback to our adipic acid protocol. And so we assemble a work group and use their feedback to really advise protocol development and produce rigorous and well-vetted protocols. We always strive for balanced representation, including folks from the government, other environmental NGOs, industry, our project developers, verifiers, academia, and other scientific personnel and technical consultants. We request that interested stakeholders complete and submit statement of interest or SOI forms to us for our review, and then we select those to join our work group, and the engagement process really kicks off, which could require a significant time commitment. We hope that the stakeholders, especially if they're expressing interest, have an understanding of project-based greenhouse gas accounting, and or at least a strong familiarity with the specific protocol or activities for which the protocol is being developed. What this process and expectations might look like. Bear with me, this is kind of works in a zigzag portion. So we have our process here where the reserve staff identify and solicit feedback on the specific protocol criteria first and foremost, so maybe on the baseline or additionality, and then we expect the work group members to review, comment on, and provide recommendations on those specific protocol criteria. We'll schedule and hold probably 2 to 3 meetings depending on the protocol being developed, and that first meeting will be to go over those specific protocol elements. We expect that the worker members will participate fully in those meetings, which are held via webinar. The reserve staff all along is then producing a draft protocol for review, which we will submit to our work group members and discuss thoroughly in a webinar meeting as well. And we expect that stakeholders will provide comments during the meeting, of course, but also written comments for us, so we can review and incorporate feedback where possible. And that's what we're going to do: resolve the protocol based on all the feedback we receive before we finalize it for a public comment version. If work group members feel that maybe their feedback wasn't addressed or during prior to the release of the public comment draft, during public comment, just like everybody else, you are welcome to publicly submit your comments, which we post online, the original comments and our responses. Getting at that transparency aspect. Okay, and so then to wrap up protocol development, just to give you the general outline of what all our protocols look like, we have the project background and definition, defining the project activities, defining eligibility, so what needs to be in place to actually so that a project will be eligible for emission reductions, and this of course includes that additionality assessment. We establish a greenhouse gas assessment boundary. So that is the boundary of all the greenhouse gas emission sources, sinks, and reservoirs that are included in the quantification of the emission reductions or removal enhancements, which is then of course the next big section on actual quantification, where we have guidance on calculating the baseline emissions, what was happening prior to the project, and then the project emissions, any emissions stemming during the actual project. We'll then have a monitoring section on how to go about monitoring all the eligibility and quantification parameters of the project. And lastly, a reporting and verification section, respectively, on how to go about reporting and verifying the project performance. Okay, so that was a lot of information to throw on everybody, but wanted to make sure everyone, before we dive into the specifics on adipic acid, we're all on the same page about the climate action reserve and our protocol development process, which for adipic acid, I told you, is fully in our our hands currently, and we're really at the onset here of kicking this off. So adipic acid, I mean, what what is it, right? It is a white crystalline solid that is used in the manufacture of synthetic fibers, plastics, coatings, urethane foams, elastomers, and synthetic lubricants. It is one of the top 50 synthetic chemicals annually produced in the U.S. And why this is such a big deal is because it is the largest precursor to the manufacture of nylon. And as you can see in the photos here at the bottom of the slide, nylon is used in everything. And so that means there is a lot of adipic acid production to then produce nylon. I mean, nylon's used in carpets, tire cords, a lot of auto equipment, safety airbags, apparel, and I mean, countless other applications as seen here. Nylon really is this great product that's durable and has flexibility, and so it just has countless uses. And so because of that, adipic acid is there's a great amount of adipic acid production. So let's look, try not to dive too much on the chemical reaction here, but to give you an overview of what this manufacturing process looks like and why the reserve is interested, right? So adipic acid is produced through a two-stage chemical reaction. First, there is the oxidation of a cyclohexane to form a cyclohexanol mixture. Then this oxidation of this mixture, so its combination with oxygen and with nitric acid, for which the reserve also has an offset protocol for, ends up producing adipic acid. So the precursor to producing adipic acid is nitric acid, and then the precursor to producing nylon is adipic acid. During the production of nitric acid, N2O, nitrous oxide, is generated and emitted, and similarly for the production of adipic acid, nitrous oxide is generated and emitted as a byproduct. Why this is of chief concern, because nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas that is roughly 300 times as potent as 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. So there's a big global warming potential there. The image here shows the overview of the second stage in the process and the release of the N2O there as the byproduct. So you can see adipic acid plus N2O captured there. What's great is N2O abatement or mitigation or control technology can be installed downstream of where the reaction occurs at an adipic acid plant to treat the off gas to mitigate the amount of N2O that is emitted during and lost as a byproduct during this process. So to provide an overview of what that abatement technology might look like, it falls into 4 general types of systems as outlined below. Catalytic destruction, this type of technology destroys the N2O using a catalyst that is, it breaks up the N2O into different components such as nitrogen and oxygen. There can be a selective catalytic reduction, which as this name implies, it is selective in the gas that it is reducing. So for this case, an N2O selective one would specifically reduce N2O, or it could be a non-selective catalytic reduction, which would unintentionally or indirectly might destroy N2O, but it has a chief purpose to destroy a different gas, most commonly here nitrogen oxides, which fuel ground level ozone or smog and all the local air pollution. Thermal destruction, as its name implies, this is truly just using thermal reduction units to destroy the N2O using high temperatures. Recycling or utilization technologies can capture and reuse N2O as an input to produce other products, and or specifically that can be done to create nitric acid, which is an input to this overall big process here of nitric acid followed by adipic acid followed by nylon. Currently, most adipic acid plants, AAPs, are fitted with some type of N2O abatement technology. However, there are often barriers, financial or otherwise, that make it impractical to fully utilize the existing technology to abate N2O. So that is 100% of the N2O being emitted, losses that byproduct is not being destroyed or mitigated. So as a chief example here, there could be a trade-off between nitrous oxide abatement technology and abating for the other potentially harmful pollutants that are released from these processes. And I should note the release of nitrogen oxide is released in the earlier stages of the process, not that second one shown on the previous slide. And nitrogen oxide, as they are harmful local air pollutants, are regulated under the Clean Air Act. Nitrous oxide emissions are not, but nitrogen oxide emissions are, which then creates more of an incentive to abate nitrogen oxide over nitrogen oxides over nitrous oxide, N2O, because they are legally required to keep their limits in check. This slide here, I want to provide an overview of the U.S. production history of adipic acid. Data here is all courtesy of historical and the most recent U.S. EPA greenhouse gas inventories. We are lucky with this project type because there are so many regulations around this type of industry. There is sufficient data available on mostly through the EPA. So again, this is courtesy of greenhouse gas inventories. From recent studies, the U.S. still accounts for the largest share of global adipic acid production at roughly 30% of the mix, which is closely followed by Europe and then China. Using the greenhouse gas inventories, we can look back as early as 1990, and the companies that have been involved over time have been the Invista Performance Technologies, Ascend Performance Materials, and Inolex. Inolex is highlighted in red, get to that in a moment. In 1990, there were 4 adipic acid plants in operation in the U.S. By the late 90s, 3 adipic acid plants, 3 of the 4, had decided to voluntarily install N2O abatement technologies. And a kind of interesting story, this was mostly done because the big companies, the producers, realized how much N2O was being released to the atmosphere from their operations, and decided to voluntarily install this abatement technology. I believe there was also a lot of opportunity to, also reduce the nitrogen oxide emissions released from it. That being said, there was a big uptake in abatement technologies being installed. That Inolex facility, though, in 2006 ceased production, and it had only accounted for such a small amount of production anyway. And it is the one of the 4 that had never abated N2O emissions. In the late 2000s, then we had a lot of plant idling. They where operation was low. I believe 2 of the 3 plants just weren't producing adipic acid at the time. And then by 2015, Invista, which had owned 2 of the 3 remaining plants, its facility in Orange, Texas, ceased the production of adipic acid. So that means that currently, right now, in 2019, there are only 2 U.S. adipic acid plants in operation, and that is an Invista and Ascend plant, which we'll see on the coming slides. And so all production now has the U.S. the adipic acid production takes place at 1 of 2 facilities. The map here, again, courtesy of the U.S. EPA. This is from the greenhouse gas reporting program in their facility information greenhouse gas tool. You can see here that the Invista, the 2 currently operating plants, the Invista plant is located in Victoria, Texas. The Ascend plant is in the panhandle of Florida, almost at the border of Alabama. And you can see as well also where the Invista plant that had ceased operations was located, and the Inolex one, which was all the way over in Virginia. But otherwise, the remaining 3 had all been in a relatively close proximity to one another. To provide a little bit overview of these plants, and this is all based on, again, from thanks to data from the U.S. EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, we have 2017 facility information. So the Invista Victoria plant has had 2 abatement technologies installed to date. They have their own specific boilers which kind of works as a thermal reduction unit, if you will, where it's just the significantly high heat to destroy the N2O. And then they also have a selective catalytic reduction technology in place that selects N2O specifically to destroy via using a catalyst. So this has resulted in a significant amount of abatement of their gross N2O emissions. So this plant in 2017 actually abated 97% of its gross N2O emissions released during the production of adipic acid. However, as I highlighted in red here, I want to still show that even after abating 97% of emissions, it still released over 600,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions from producing adipic acid, which is still a good amount to give it that some comparison. Some of our livestock projects, for example, annually reduce anywhere from 20 to 50,000 tons. So this is a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions that could still be abated. Kind of similarly, for the Ascend Performance Materials plant in Cantonment, Florida, it has had one abatement technology in place, a thermal reduction unit, again using high heat to destroy its N2O emissions. With that technology, it abated just over 83% of its gross N2O emissions in 2017. But then when you look at the net emissions from this plant, it's 6.7 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions were still equivalent emissions were still remaining. So that's representative of that, remaining 17% of N2O emissions released to the atmosphere. So there is still a great amount of emission mitigation potential here. To quickly highlight the trends and why I showed the earlier slide about production history, because the different plants have their own various technologies and level of emission controls employed, there's a great fluctuation between production and then the emissions you see here. As I mentioned in 08 to 2010, there was plant idling, so that's why it's low. But the orange line here being the N2O emissions. But what's important, what I want to show here is that we have the trend is ticking upwards again, where it's 2015 through 2017 we have this increase in N2O emissions from the only two adipic acid plants in production, and that production has remained steady over time, has increased roughly by 10% since 1990, and of course emissions have been abated pretty significantly from this process since 1990. But as the last slide showed, there is still a substantial amount of emissions that can be further abated. And quickly just wanted to highlight how this stands compared to other industrial processes in the US and its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. You could see greenhouse gas emissions from adipic acid are pretty high up there. I know we're running short of time, so want to quickly jump through our takeaways here. As I mentioned, there's still a huge amount of potential here despite the historical abatement, and we anticipate adipic acid production staying on par with historical trends because nylon remains in high demand. So as such, there is an enormous potential to further reduce emissions given appropriate incentives in place to install control technologies. And we believe that carbon offsets can provide that incentive to make that capital investment to either further utilize the existing emissions control technology at a higher rate or to install new emissions abatement control technology. And that's where we're going to get in the remaining slides. Adipic acid projects were implemented internationally. Quickly go over Kyoto Protocol mechanisms, which was a former, before the Paris Climate Agreement, the chief climate agreement by the UN, the Kyoto Protocol. There was the Clean Development Mechanism and then the Joint Implementation Mechanism. Clean Development Mechanism allowed the developing project to be, an emission reduction project really be implemented in a developing country. Joint implementation to be implemented in developed countries, but they could be implemented in a different developed country. I'm really summarizing here for the time crunch. But why this is important and we need to address is because there was a lot of gaming with the CDM adipic acid production methodology. It incentivized the installation of a catalytic or thermal destruction facility at existing adipic acid plants, but there were significant issues or even, flaws here with the methodology that we can easily overcome. And so the results of which were creating secondary or unintended effects, which in the greenhouse gas accounting world is termed leakage. That is a shifting of adipic acid production because of the offset projects. And so this really generated non-additional credits or really emission reductions that weren't quote unquote real. And so this actually led the European Union to ban the use of these offsets from its carbon market. The Stockholm Environmental Institute, which is a major think tank, did a huge assessment on the issues that arose here with this methodology. And there was this major flaw that the methodology, had set the baseline rate at 0%. So this was assuming that there was no existing abatement at any facilities going on. And so therefore any abatement that was done at a CDM project, that resulted in 100% worth of emission reductions. Interestingly enough, too, from how the market worked, the value of the certified emission reductions, the credits from the CDM methodology, were exceeded the value of the adipic acid product itself. So there was an uptick in production, a shifting of production to the CDM plants to create adipic acid there, so that they could then have greater amount of N2O emissions, which were then they were getting 100% credit for abating and earn that many more credits. And so that is not what we want to have happen here. We don't want to incentivize the increase of production of adipic acid to earn the carbon credits. We want to incentivize the installation of the abatement technology to reduce the remaining incremental amount of emissions that aren't currently being abated. The key recommendation, and it's pretty straightforward to do so, is to set a thorough baseline. And so that's actually why I mentioned them. The joint implementation projects had done, and they had set historical abatement levels at around 90%, as again opposed to the 0%. And so by only crediting for those incremental emissions beyond individual facilities' historical abatement levels, the economic incentives for the credits from those actually did not create the skewed incentive structure that the CDM methodologies had done so. So the reserve believes as well, to jump to the next slide, that as long as we set a clear baseline and have a rigid baseline in place, that where the protocol would only generate credits for those incremental emission reductions above a baseline set on an individual plant's historical emission rates and abatement levels, then we can really overcome the issues that plagued the CDM methodology and the international projects. The other things we have going for us in the US, which would mitigate the risk of overcrediting, is the overproduction of adipic acid is unlikely to really occur because as I mentioned earlier, this would also result in the increase in nitrogen oxide emissions, which these facilities do have limits on, thanks to the U.S. Clean Air Act. So they would have to increase their costs to reduce the associated increases in NOx emissions as well. And then this data also comes to us from Ecosystem Marketplace. The value of voluntary carbon offsets in the U.S. is significantly lower than the historical CDM certified emission reduction credits when the gaming occurred. We're looking at an average of $2.40 per voluntary credit. It's not just CRTs, that's all the voluntary carbon credits out there in Q1 of 2018, compared to over $18 per credit for the CDM methodologies. And kind of as I mentioned with the joint implementation projects, should that average voluntary credit price increase, which we certainly, of course, hope it does, we still don't anticipate that value for the credit would cause an increase in or a shifting of production and result in over crediting. Just because that anticipated volume that could be generated wouldn't be there. Like that same because the CDM methodology had set a 0% baseline, 0% level of abatement in the baseline. That set the bar for that much more of a significant amount of emission reductions, and so that just potential would not be there in the reserves protocol, as we only get at the incremental emission reductions. So to really quickly highlight our proposed approach, the goal here is to create a robust protocol, adhere to the high quality criteria that I mentioned at the onset of this meeting, leverage the lessons that I just discussed from the historical international projects. We're lucky that this is a very similar process to the production of nitric acid production, which we also have a protocol already in existence and is successful. And the abatement technology for adipic acid plants follows this, so we can really rely on that pretty heavily. And of course, we will be soliciting, incorporating expert stakeholder feedback throughout. So to quickly just highlight the protocol sections, the definition would be the installation operation of a new control technology or the enhancement of an existing one at a single adipic acid plant that results in the reduction of N2O emissions that otherwise would have been vented to the atmosphere. The 2017, that remaining 3% at the Invista plant, and at the Ascend plant, that remaining 17%, for example. We also, for the first version, proposing that projects may only be implemented at existing, relocated, or upgraded adipic acid plants. So one of those two in the US, as I get at our eligibility criteria, also focusing currently at adipic acid plants in the US, though there is potential to expand to Canada and Mexico. Again, as the reserve focuses on North America. These are just our eligibility criteria here, folks. So the start date would just simply be the date on which adipic acid production begins after the technology has been modified or installed. Crediting period, we will allow projects to earn carbon credits for a period of 10 years, after which they could renew for a second time if they would like. I'll touch on the additionality on the next couple slides. Regulatory compliance, of course, our projects need to maintain compliance with all applicable laws. The performance standard test will be pretty simple. It's based on a technology standard, and so as we've already touched on, and this table should look familiar to you here now, these are the general types of abatement technologies. So if an existing facility utilizes their existing emissions control technology at a higher rate than previously done so, or installs a new emissions abatement control technology, we are proposing that they would pass the performance standard test for additionality, because they otherwise would not have done so if it wasn't for this incentive to earn carbon credits. Legal requirement tests. There are currently no federal, state, or local regulations that require these plants to abate N2O emissions specifically. And I caution under typical conditions, because there is this technicality under the Clean Air Act that we may face down the road, but not necessarily, where there is what's known as the tailoring rule, that when necessary, prevention of significant deterioration permits for greenhouse gas emissions require an assessment of best available control technology, and the permitting authority gets to mandate what gets installed. And so in the future, if these PSD permits require the installation of the same technology that they would voluntarily install for a carbon offset credit, then of course it would no longer be eligible for offsets, because now the plant is legally required to install and operate that technology. We'll quickly run through our assessment boundary proposed here. Just obviously we're including the N2O from the adipic acid production. Some other ones to look at would be the carbon dioxide or methane from hydrocarbons that could be used as reducing agents in mitigating the N2O, and then also the release of the three greenhouse gases there possibly from reheating the off gas before it enters an abatement technology. This is what I want to make sure we have time for. This is very important, getting the quantification right. So as I mentioned, a huge focus here on the baseline scenario. Baseline emissions will be based on an adipic acid plant specific historical quantity of nitrous oxide released in the off gas before it ever entered an existing abatement technology in the project. And it's important for that each project establishes a specific, so each plant would establish a specific baseline emission factor that's based on the ratio of N2O emissions to its maximum adipic acid production. So keeping that factor conservative, that would help account for, the amount of N2O emissions released per adipic acid produced. And we would look at historically the past 5 years of production and emissions data, which thankfully is easily accessible courtesy of the EPA. Project emissions, N2O abatement is of course not 100% efficient, so any emissions that aren't destroyed by the abatement technology would be measured and included as project emissions. Leakage, I do want to just note that we will be providing further consideration to this concept of leakage, assess the potential. We don't, as I mentioned earlier, we don't perceive there being nearly as great of a risk with overcrediting or production shifting that occurred internationally with a reserve US-based protocol, but we still, of course, will be assessing the potential for leakage and would, of course, welcome stakeholder feedback on that. Monitoring, I'll highlight here, continuous emission monitoring systems, which are the most accurate means of monitoring emissions data, are already in place thanks to requirements under the Clean Air Act. And so we're lucky that we can also, for monitoring, follow relevance of the Code of Federal Regulations in place for these type of plants. So the monitoring is pretty straightforward, and in most instances this should already be in place in status quo for these plants. Reporting and verification must be reported to us and verified annually, but they shall cover the same time period as a full campaign or adipic acid production cycle, and there could be multiple campaigns in a year, and a verification could possibly constitute one verification period, then could possibly constitute more than one reporting period. We'll just quickly summarize here that we believe the carbon market could play an effective role in incentivizing the further abatement at these plants, because this industry is so emission intensive that even despite the historical abatement levels, there's still an enormous remaining potential to reduce emissions further, given the appropriate incentives are in place. And we believe, the reserve is well suited to ensure that an offset protocol is of highest quality and would mitigate all those risks and issues faced internationally. Quickly, we'll go over this timeline that obviously just did an overview of all our research and our scoping. An issue paper is pending release. The scoping meeting was held today. Most importantly, I want to highlight we're forming our work group, that we want this work group process to kick off in the coming weeks and will probably run through November, at which point we will have the public comment period. And our target is to have the board adopt this protocol in January, end of January, start of the new year. Seems crazy to see 2020 there already. And of course, throughout, the reserve is already drafting this protocol. It is well underway. So I really want to highlight these next steps to these stakeholders. Thank you all for your patience that you went through this. We are requesting that the statement of interest forms due by this upcoming Friday. So please get those into us if you haven't done so already. Really encouraged by those folks who already have got a good group of stakeholders so far. And we're going to follow up right away next week to launch this work group. So please stay tuned. We will be scheduling that first work group meeting, most likely take place at the end of September or the beginning of October. A second work group meeting will be scheduled for the end of October or beginning of November to really go over the draft protocol on a section by section basis. And again, protocol drafting is going on throughout, or currently right now, and we're going to solicit work group feedback throughout. And because we ran out of time for questions, that feedback can begin now with all the questions I hope had been submitted during the question box during the webinar. I apologize for not having enough time. There was a lot of great information to cover. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm going to leave this up for the time being because that provides the link to our protocol page, my contact information, Trevor Anderson, Policy Manager. Please submit any questions, comments, concerns you have to me about the protocol itself at this time. I'll be working with Heather to go through any questions that came in popped up during the webinar, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible because we are very keen to receive your feedback and thoughts on this protocol. And then to get those SOI forms into our policy account, the policy at climateactionreserve.org. We are at the top of the hour. I really want to, again, thank you all for joining us here today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'll let you all get on with the rest of your days, and we'll be in touch with those of you shortly. And please stay tuned for what I hope to be an engaging protocol development process. Thank you all again.